"This building ain't yours no more. Pack it up or get dragged out," growled the city inspector, voice soaked in entitlement, eyes fixed only on the black tenants like Tanya, as if their presence was the infestation he came to clear. Tanya Whitaker knew something was off the second she turned the corner onto Fairview Court. Her street, usually calm in the late afternoon, buzzed with an uneasy tension. Cars were parked haphazardly. Neighbors lingered on the sidewalk, arms folded, eyes darting. A pair of children sat on the curb beside their backpacks, their faces unusually quiet for kids just out of school. Tanya's heart beat faster. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder, gripped the brown paper bag of groceries tighter, and walked faster. Her building stood tall and proud at the end of the block, a relic of the 1930s with intricate brickwork and arched windows. Fairview Court wasn't fancy, but it had soul. It had survived time, war, redlining, and gentrification's first wave. But as Tanya stepped through the front gate and onto the stone steps, that pride crumbled. Bright orange eviction notices, slapped crookily across nearly every door in the hallway, greeted her like a bad dream. Her own door, apartment 3B, was no exception. She stared at the notice for a long second before pulling it off the wood, fingers trembling. Her eyes scanned the paper. Immediate eviction due to health and safety code violations. 10 days to vacate. No option to appeal. What the hell? She whispered. The grocery bag slipped from her hand, apples tumbling onto the hallway tiles. A door creaked open. Mrs. Washington, from 3C, peeked out with swollen eyes. "You got one too?" the older woman asked, voice hoarse. Tanya nodded slowly. "Code violations?" "What violations? I've been living here 18 years. Never had a problem until now." Mrs. Washington opened her door wider, revealing her packed suitcases behind her. Tanya stepped over the apples and knocked on Mr. Jenkins's door. No answer. She tried again, then reached for her phone. Just as she was about to call him, the door creaked open. Mr. Jenkins stood with his cane, his lips pressed tight. "They gave me one, too," he said before she could speak. "Said the pipes are lead and the foundation's unstable." "That's not true. We just passed inspection last spring." He nodded grimly. "But who's going to check them now?" Tanya backed away from his door and hurried down to the first floor. One by one, she saw the same notices unit after unit. Families, elders, new moms, teachers, bus drivers, all being thrown out under the same lie. She found Kira in the laundry room, folding sheets with her headphones on. Tanya snatched one of the earbuds. "You see this?" She held up her notice. Kira blinked. "Yeah, it's on mine too. They're saying it's the wiring or something, but it's a lie." "Why would they lie?" Kira hesitated. "Because they want us gone. And fast." Tanya spent the rest of the evening walking door to door, talking to every neighbor still home. At least 10 families had already left. One man said the locks on his unit had been changed while he was at work. Another family was packing their car to sleep at a cousin's place in Easttown. Someone mentioned seeing a U-Haul truck in front of Building B this morning. By nightfall, a group of them had gathered in the hallway outside Tanya's door. The fluorescent lights above flickered as the weight of fear pressed down on them. Mr. Jenkins, ever the quiet one, spoke first. "This ain't random." Kira agreed. "The landlord crawl, he owns 3 other buildings nearby. Same thing happened to them. Orange notices. 10 days. Boom. Empty." Tanya frowned. "How can they get away with it?" "Code violations are hard to disprove," Kira replied. "And if the city inspector's on their side? But this is illegal." "It has to be," Tanya insisted. "We have rights." "They're betting we don't know them." Mr. Jenkins leaned against his cane. "I've seen this before. In the 70s, push out the old, the poor, the black, and bring in the rich. Just with fancier words now." Tanya looked around at the familiar faces, people she'd known for years, watched grow old or raise children. Her eyes stopped on a pair of small shoes outside the Wilsons' apartment, now gathering dust. "We can't just leave." That night, Tanya couldn't sleep. Isaiah, her 12-year-old son, curled beside her on the couch, watching cartoons, unaware of the full threat. She stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. She thought about the rent increases over the last 2 years, the leaky faucet that took 4 months to fix, the new cameras in the lobby, the extra security deposit demand last winter. And now this. Just before dawn, she put on her coat and walked outside. The air bit at her cheeks. She moved quietly past Building B, then C. At the corner of the block, she stopped dead in her tracks. A massive yellow bulldozer sat on a flatbed trailer behind a chain-link fence, with construction signage tucked underneath a tarp. It wasn't just parked, it was staged. Ready. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. The next morning, Tanya called the landlord's office. Straight to voicemail. She emailed. No reply. She called the City Housing Authority. They told her to seek private legal counsel. No one else picked up. Kira had the same luck. They met again that evening in the basement rec room. 20 tenants sat in folding chairs or leaned against walls. Tanya stood in the center. I'm not leaving, and none of you should either. A man from 2A shook his head. If they're shutting off the water next week, what choice do we have? We organize, Tanya said. We document, we fight. Mr. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. You got a lawyer? Not yet, she admitted. But I've already emailed 3 tenant defense groups. Someone will take the case. We don't have much time. I know. That's why we start now. By the end of the night, they'd formed a tenant committee. Kira agreed to start a digital log of every incident. Tanya would speak to the press if they found someone willing to listen. Others would canvass the nearby blocks to see if this was happening elsewhere. As they disbanded, Mr. Jenkins lingered behind. He leaned on his cane and looked at Tanya for a long moment. You got fight in you, he said softly. Reminds me of my wife. She used to protest in Selma, never backed down. Tanya smiled faintly. Maybe it runs in all of us. The next day, a new notice was posted in the lobby. Building to be closed pending demolition permit review. No date, no explanation. Just a message of finality. Tanya stood before it, her son's hand in hers. Around them, more neighbors had vanished. Quiet overnight departures. Fear-driven exodus. She looked down at Isaiah. We're not going anywhere, she whispered. That night, she walked past Mr. Jenkins' door and stopped cold. His cane, his old wooden cane, chipped and worn from decades, leaned alone against the steps. Abandoned. Tanya stepped into the cold morning with fire in her chest. The breath she exhaled turned to vapor, but the anger burning through her kept her from feeling the chill. Isaiah had begged her to stay. Just call them, Mom, he said. Don't go down there. But Tanya knew phone calls didn't move systems. Not ones designed to ignore voices like hers. You had to stand in their lobby. Make them look you in the face when they lied to you. She stood in the city records building 20 minutes later, wrapped in a wool coat and determination. The clerk behind the counter didn't look up when she approached. Tanya cleared her throat. I need public records, she said. Zoning specifically for Fairview Court apartments. Anything filed in the last 6 months. The clerk sighed without lifting his gaze. That's online now. I looked online, Tanya said. It's not there. He finally looked up. You a lawyer? I'm a resident. That building's private property. You're not entitled to. It's a zoning record, she snapped. Public access. Am I wrong? The man paused. Wait here. He disappeared into a back room. Tanya stared at the municipal seal etched into the plexiglass window. It looked like a shield, but it didn't protect her. After 15 minutes, he returned with a thin manila folder and a flash drive. There's your paperwork, he said. Digital copies are on here. Make it quick. She sat at the corner terminal, slipped in the drive, and opened the files. There it was, plain as day. Filed just 6 weeks ago. An application to rezone the block for mixed-use luxury development. Developer listed, Kroll Holdings, LLC. Expected demolition of existing structures, January. Projected completion of high-rise condos. Fall next year. Tanya's stomach turned. She scrolled further and found attached documents, city inspector reports, dated 3 days before the eviction notices, citing plumbing concerns, structural weakness, outdated electrical wiring, all marked critical. But she'd seen the work orders herself. The pipes had been replaced in 2021, the foundation reinforced. The inspection in March had given them a clean report. Tanya's fingers trembled. This wasn't an emergency evacuation. It was a land grab, a carefully staged one. She pulled out her phone and snapped photos of everything on the screen. She emailed copies to herself, Kira, and a new Gmail account she created right then, just in case something happened to the others. By the time she returned to the building, Kira was waiting by the front steps, holding a clipboard and wearing the same grim determination Tanya now carried. "I found something too," Kira said. "The building down the street, same landlord. Evicted 2 years ago. Now it's a Whole Foods." Tanya handed her the flash drive. They filed for demolition. Weeks ago. They stared at each other, the truth landing between them like thunder. Kroll had planned this all along. The violations, the silence, the bulldozer. It was a scripted erasure. That evening they called another meeting. The tenant group had shrunk. 2 more families had packed up and vanished overnight. Tanya noticed a moving truck parked outside with no license plate. Suspicious. A security guard stood near the lobby now, arms crossed, eyes watching the tenants like they were squatters in their own homes. Inside the rec room, Tanya set up her laptop and projected the documents onto the wall. "Here's proof," she said. "He filed to rezone, he signed this, and those code violations? Fake. I'm going to the housing board tomorrow." Kira passed around printed copies. "We need more than complaints. We need visibility." "How?" someone asked. "Nobody cares about us." "They will," Kira said. "We go public. Press, video, petitions, social, noise." Mr. Jenkins, still weak from a recent fall, lifted his voice. "I'll talk about what this place meant. What we've lost. I've lived here since before they paved the sidewalks." A quiet murmur of support filled the room. "Are you sure?" Tanya asked gently. He nodded. "If I don't, who will?" They created a list of action items. Kira would record stories from tenants. Tanya would call every local news station. Others volunteered to go door to door on nearby blocks, warning residents who might be next. They needed an attorney. They needed allies. But most of all, they needed time, and they were running out of it. The next morning, Tanya visited the city housing board. A receptionist with overplucked eyebrows and a headset informed her that due to volume, all complaints must be submitted via email. "I brought documents," Tanya said. "I have proof." "Email only," the woman repeated, not even looking up. "I'm not leaving until someone takes this seriously," Tanya said, louder this time. A man in a blue shirt and badge finally approached. He introduced himself as Inspector Rhodes. "Let me see what you've got," he said. They sat in a cramped cubicle as Tanya scrolled through photos and documents. Rhodes nodded occasionally, but said nothing. When she finished, he leaned back. "These are serious accusations. They're facts. Do you have a lawyer? No? Well, without legal representation, it's hard to escalate. I can flag it, but what?" He hesitated. "You should start packing. If the court doesn't issue a stop work order, demolition can proceed." Tanya stood slowly. "So that's it? That's the process?" "Miss Whitaker, this happens more often than you think." "I know. That's why I'm not letting it happen again." When Tanya got home, she found Isaiah sitting on the steps with a worried look. "There was a man here," he said. "He took pictures of the building. He had a hard hat." Tanya's eyes narrowed. She stormed into the lobby. Sure enough, blue chalk marks had appeared on the tiled floor-coated construction measurements. An eviction notice from last week was gone. In its place, a new paper reading, "Unsafe structure. Subject to emergency closure." Tanya grabbed her phone and dialed Kira. "We need to post the videos now." They spent the next few hours editing tenant interviews. Mr. Jenkins sat on his couch, sunlight streaming through the window. recounting how he'd raised 3 kids in that apartment. Kira filmed Tanya walking through peeling walls the landlord had never fixed, pipes she had personally documented after repair. They posted the video on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook with the caption, "They're erasing us. This is how." By nightfall, the video had over 2,000 views. A local organizer messaged them. A small news blog asked for permission to reshare. Kira smiled at her phone. It's spreading. But so was the intimidation. The next morning, they woke up to find the building's security system replaced. A new lockbox. A sign on the front entrance. Authorized personnel only. One tenant's car had been towed. Another found her mailbox ripped open. Kira knocked on Tanya's door, panicked. "I think they're accelerating it. We won't let them." That night, Tanya walked the hallway, notebook in hand. She documented every camera, every new mark, every tenant still inside. Half the building was empty now, lights off. Windows boarded up, like ghosts were moving in instead of families. She paused outside Mr. Jenkins' door. It was ajar. She knocked. "It's Tanya." No answer. She pushed the door open and found him sitting on the floor, clutching his chest. "Mr. Jenkins." She ran to him, helped him sit up, grabbed her phone, and dialed 911. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. She bolted downstairs and screamed for Kira. Within minutes, a few neighbors surrounded them. One offered his car. They rushed Mr. Jenkins to the emergency room. Tanya sat with him the entire night. The doctor said it was stress-induced angina. "He'll recover," one nurse said, "but he needs rest." When Tanya got home at dawn, her hallway felt colder than ever. The doors were quieter, the faces fewer. She turned the corner to see Kira waiting with her phone. "The inspector came today. What did he say?" Kira's hands shook as she read the message aloud. "He marked the building non-habitable starting next week. They're calling it an emergency clearance." Tanya stared at her. "But it's not condemned. They don't need it to be. Not if the right boxes are checked." Tanya's body slumped against the wall. She closed her eyes. Then she opened them slowly and stood upright. "We have 5 days. To do what?" "To go louder." The locks would change while Tanya was walking Isaiah to school. She returned to find her key no longer fit the door to 3B. She tried it again. Slowly this time, twisting the knob while pushing her shoulder gently against the frame. Nothing. Her stomach dropped. She jiggled the key again, harder this time. Still nothing. She banged on the door. From the end of the hall, a voice called out, "They did it to me, too." Tanya turned. Kira stood near the stairwell, holding a backpack and a half-eaten granola bar. "When?" Tanya asked, her voice rising. "This morning, right after I left for work." "You can't just—" Tanya stopped herself. She pulled out her phone and started recording. She walked up to her door, zoomed in on the new lock, and then turned the camera to herself. "I'm Tanya Whitaker. This is my apartment. I've lived here for 7 years. My name is on the lease. And today, without warning, they changed my locks and shut me out." Kira stepped beside her. "Me too. Unit 2C. They're evicting us illegally and trying to scare us into leaving." They walked down the hallway together. Mr. Jenkins' door was slightly open. Tanya knocked. "You okay?" she asked. He shuffled into view. "They didn't change mine yet," he said. "But the guy's been around. Clipboard. Toolbox. Said he's just a contractor." Tanya nodded and turned back to Kira. "We need to find him." They didn't have to look far. Down in the lobby, a short man in paint-streaked jeans and a tool belt stood at the mailboxes, talking on the phone. Tanya approached with her camera still rolling. "Are you the one changing locks?" she asked. The man looked startled. Yeah, I was told to." "By who?" The management. Kroll Properties. I just have the work order." "Do you have ID, a copy of the order?" He reached into his back pocket and fished out a crumpled piece of paper. Tanya grabbed it before he could second-guess himself. Kira leaned in. It was a generic locksmith work order. No signatures. No city stamp. Just the words non-compliant, unit secure, and restrict access. You know, this is illegal, Tanya said. I didn't know. Well, you do now. The man's voice wavered. Look, I'm just trying to get paid. I'll stop. I swear. Tanya looked into his eyes. He wasn't lying, he was terrified. Not of her, but of getting caught up in whatever this was. Leave, she said. He left. Kira exhaled. One down. But they both knew it wasn't enough. Tanya's lock was still changed. Her son's backpack was still inside. Her groceries, clothes, Isaiah's asthma, medication. Gone. She stood in the lobby, fists clenched. I'm calling every number I can find. We're going to blast this thing open. They started that night. Kira uploaded the video of the locks being changed. She layered it with commentary, adding clips of the eviction notices, demolition permits, and even Isaiah's soft voice asking why they couldn't sleep in their own bed. It hit social media like a match to dry grass. By morning, they had over 12,000 views. The comment section exploded. This is criminal. Name and shame the landlord. How is this legal? Where's the city? A message appeared in Tanya's inbox from a lawyer named Maya Chun. Tenant rights, pro bono, located right in the city. I saw your video. Let's talk. I think you have a case. Maya met them that afternoon in a coffee shop across from the courthouse. She was sharp-eyed, mid-30s, and carried a messenger bag stuffed with highlighters, case law printouts, and a reusable water bottle with "Resist" stickered across it. I've dealt with Crawl before, Maya said, sliding a legal pad across the table. He's done this to 4 other buildings in the last 5 years. Same MO, manufactured violations, fake inspection reports, accelerated lockouts. How did he get away with it? Kira asked. He settles. Pays off 1 or 2 people, gets ND assigned, and demolishes before anyone can organize. Well, not this time, Tanya said. No, Maya agreed. Not this time. She pulled out a form. I'm filing for an injunction to stop any further eviction action. If we're lucky, we'll get a temporary restraining order. What do you need from us? Tanya asked. Affidavits, statements, photos, videos, names of other tenants still in the building. The more documentation, the better. They handed over everything. By the end of the meeting, Maya had started the paperwork. Keep filming everything, she said. They're going to push back. Back at the building, Tanya and Kira found more surprises. The front door now had a keypad lock. The lobby lights were turned off. The elevator was marked out of service, though it had worked fine just 2 hours earlier. And 3 new security guards stood on the property, none in uniform, but all with earpieces and crossed arms. Tanya tried the front door. Locked. One of the guards approached. Can I help you? This is my building. Not anymore. Tanya turned her phone camera back on. This is Tanya Whitaker. I'm being denied access to my own home. The guard shifted uncomfortably. You're trespassing. I have a lease, he shrugged. I'm just doing my job. Well, your job's illegal, Kira snapped. Smile for the internet. That night, Tanya and Isaiah slept at Kira's place. They shared a pull-out couch, and while Isaiah drifted off quickly, Tanya stared at the ceiling. Her mind raced through every possible step. The hearing was in 3 days. Maya had warned her that TROs weren't guaranteed. If the judge didn't buy their argument, Crawl could proceed. The thought of bulldozers gutting her home, her memories, made her chest ache. At sunrise, Tanya was already outside the building, camera in hand. She interviewed remaining tenants as they exited to go to work. One woman, Sandra from 1A, stood in tears as she explained how she had nowhere to go. I've been here 11 years. I just paid rent last week. They said I was late on repairs, but I've never even filed a complaint. Did they lock you out too? Not yet. Can I record you? Sandra nodded. Tanya captured every word. They posted the video. Another 30,000 views. A reporter reached out next to a young journalist named Malik Ford from an independent news outlet. He met Tanya on the sidewalk that afternoon, camera slung over his shoulder, notebook tucked into his jacket. I saw your story. I want to help. You know what you're walking into? She asked. He smiled. Only the best kind of trouble. He spent the next few hours interviewing everyone: Mr. Jenkins, Kira, Tanya, Sandra. He took drone shots of the building, captured images of the new locks, traced the property records and zoning proposals. By nightfall, he had enough for an expose. The next day, his article dropped. Luxury or lies? Tenants say they're being erased to make room for profit. The story included quotes, data, screenshots, and side-by-side comparisons a building's crawl had cleared before. It ended with a chilling quote from Tanya. They're trying to push us out with silence. We're answering with noise. That night, the building was surrounded by news vans, cameras, reporters, microphones, and protesters. Local organizers showed up with signs. Stop illegal evictions. We are not for sale. Crawl equals criminal. Tanya stood on the front steps with a megaphone in one hand and her son's hand in the other. We are here, she said, voice cracking but strong. We have lived in this building longer than any of them have owned it. We are not disposable. We are not temporary. We are a community. Cheers rose through the street. Neighbors from surrounding blocks joined in. Some held banners, others passed out food. Someone set up a speaker and began playing Nina Simone. Inside the building, the security guards retreated. Lights flicked back on. The elevator mysteriously started working again. But Tanya knew it wasn't over. Not yet. She returned to her unit the next morning. The locksmith had reversed the lock under pressure from the temporary restraining order granted overnight. Isaiah opened the door and ran inside, gathering his favorite blanket and old sketchbook. Tanya stepped in and froze. Everything was still there, intact, but it felt like it had been held hostage. She turned to Kira. Now we fight to keep it. Kira nodded. And make sure this never happens again. A knock came at the door. It was Maya. They just filed a motion to lift the injunction, she said. They're coming harder now. Tanya didn't hesitate. Then so are we. The morning after Malik's article went live, Tanya woke to find her phone buzzing relentlessly. Her notifications were a wall of flashing texts, call attempts, and tagged comments. Isaiah was still asleep beside her on the couch, his small hands curled into fists under his chin. She slipped out quietly and checked her messages in the kitchen. There were hundreds. Comments from strangers, neighbors, former tenants, local activists, lawyers. A civil rights group in Chicago had reposted the article. A housing justice coalition from Oakland was asking for permission to share her story. Her face tired, fierce mid-sentence with a microphone was now a thumbnail on dozens of posts spreading rapidly across the internet. She scrolled through the responses, her throat tightening. This happened to my grandma. We couldn't fight it. Thank you for standing up. You're not alone. Burn that landlord's empire to the ground. Kira was already up, knocking on her door with coffee in one hand and her laptop in the other. Her hair was a frizzy halo, her eyes wide and pulsing with energy. We're everywhere, she said, barely managing to contain herself. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, even Reddit has threads about Fairview Court. Tanya took the coffee and sipped in silence. Are people listening? Oh, they're not just listening. Kira turned the laptop around. A live petition had already collected over 20,000 signatures. The headline read, Stop the evictions at Fairview Court. Hold Crawl accountable. Tanya leaned over the screen, shaking her head in disbelief. That article was the spark, Kira said. Now we give it fuel. The doorbell rang twice, urgently. Tanya opened it to find Malik standing there, holding a camera rig and a bag of bagels. Couldn't stay away, he said with a grin. We're doing a follow-up. The response to your story is insane. He entered with the casual confidence of someone who had been thrown into the deep end before and learned to swim. He quickly set up his equipment and gestured toward the window. I want a shot of you and Isaiah in the window, just looking out. Tanya hesitated. He's just a kid. Exactly. That's what makes it powerful. Isaiah, now awake and rubbing his eyes, wandered into the room. When he saw the camera, he didn't flinch, just walked to the window and climbed onto the bench seat. Tanya joined him, resting a hand on his shoulder. The shutter clicked. Malik nodded. After filming a quick update on the legal battle, he interviewed more tenants, many of whom had avoided speaking until now. But the attention gave them courage. Sandra from 1A described being ignored by the landlord for 2 years. Carl from 4D revealed he'd been offered $2,000 in cash to leave hush money. Even Mr. Jenkins, recovering at home, agreed to speak again. "I've seen landlords try to push out black tenants before," he said from his recliner, oxygen tube still in his nose. "But never this fast. Never this organized. They're treating us like pests, not people." Malik captured every word. That afternoon, a larger protest loomed on the sidewalk, organized by a local chapter of Tenants for Justice. The demonstration brought more than 100 people to Fairview Court. They carried signs, "Homes, not hotels. Our lives aren't for sale. We built this block," and chanted in rhythm as passing cars honked in support. Tanya stood at the edge of the crowd, overwhelmed. "It's not just about us anymore," she said softly to Kira. "No," Kira agreed. "It never was." At the front of the crowd stood Reverend Claiborne, a towering woman with silver braids and a voice like thunder. She took the megaphone from one of the organizers and addressed the protesters. "Fairview Court is sacred ground. It's where veterans, teachers, mothers, and grandfathers built community. It's where the city turned its back, and the people still stood strong. We will not let gentrification bulldoze memory. We will not let greed make homelessness." Cheers erupted. Tanya stepped forward, microphone shaking in her hand. She took a breath. "I didn't ask to be a leader," she began. "I just wanted to live, raise my son, go to work, come home. But they tried to silence me. They tried to shut our doors, change our locks, erase our names. So now I speak for all of us. We're not going anywhere." The roar from the crowd was deafening. Even the security guards posted near the entrance flinched. Inside, the building buzzed with activity. Volunteers carried bottled water, hot meals, and supplies up the stairs to elderly tenants who couldn't leave. A group of college students painted signs for future marches in the hallway. Tanya's apartment became headquarters, buzzing phones, rapid texting, scribbled timelines on the whiteboard taped to her wall. But pressure was mounting. Later that evening, Maya called. "They filed a response," she said over speakerphone. "They're arguing that the building is in imminent danger of collapse." "What?" Tanya shouted. "It's a lie," Maya said. "But they've got a private structural engineer saying so. Paid off, I'm sure. Can we fight it?" "We're trying. But they've also requested an emergency demolition hearing." Kira slammed her coffee cup on the table. "How do you even fake a building collapse?" "They don't have to fake it. Just delay long enough for the judge to believe the risk is real." Tanya closed her eyes. "How much time do we have?" 3 days. They worked non-stop. Malik's follow-up video launched across all platforms. The second story included audio from the security guard admitting he was hired to keep people from coming back, paired with footage of Kroll's construction teams staging equipment nearby. The video exploded. A council member from Eastbrook retweeted it with the caption, "This can't happen on our watch." For the first time, Kroll Properties issued a statement. It was short and smug. "All decisions regarding Fairview Court have followed proper legal and safety procedures. Any insinuation otherwise is irresponsible." The community didn't buy it. A march was scheduled for Saturday 2 days before the demolition hearing. More than 500 people RSVP'd. Churches across the city signed on. Union groups pledged buses and speakers. Local radio promoted it. A muralist offered to paint a massive piece on the side of the building once the fight was won. And still, Tanya didn't sleep. Each night, she walked the halls with a flashlight, documenting everything. The cracked tile that hadn't been fixed since 2019, the peeling paint, the decades-old mail chute with names scratched into its surface. She didn't want to forget a single detail. "This place matters," she whispered into her recorder, even if no one else ever believed it. That Saturday, the march began 2 blocks away, pouring into the street like a flood. People of every age, background, and neighborhood joined the line. They carried signs, chanted slogans, and beat drums. Helicopters hovered overhead. Reporters swarmed. Police lined the sidewalks. Tanya walked near the front, Isaiah beside her holding a sign that read, "My home isn't a business deal." Mr. Jenkins, wheeled in by volunteers, gave a raised fist from his chair. When the march reached Fairview Court, the protest stopped, but the energy didn't. Reverend Claiborne took the mic again. This time she read from a letter co-signed by 12 community organizations, demanding a permanent stop to all evictions, a city investigation into Kroll, and funding for tenant-owned housing models. "This building will not fall," she declared. "It will rise." Tanya stepped forward. Her voice cracked once, then twice. But she pushed through. "My son asked me last week if we'd be sleeping in our car," she said. "I told him no. Not because I was sure, but because I had to believe we were worth more than someone's profit. Thank you for showing him that we are." That night, the protest was splashed across every local broadcast. Even national news picked it up. But Kroll wasn't finished. At 3 a.m., an anonymous tipster sent Malik a document. It was an internal memo leaked showing communications between Kroll's legal team and a city zoning official. It read, "Ensure the demolition permit is approved before Monday. Delay court proceedings by any means necessary. Once tenants are out, the city will forget." Malik sent it to Maya. "This is what we needed," she said. "We're going to court with fire." But the fire wasn't just in court. That same morning, Tanya awoke to the sound of someone yelling outside. She rushed to the window and saw 2 men in reflective vests trying to board up the side entrance of the building. A tenant was shouting at them, pushing one away. Tanya grabbed her phone and hit record. "This is illegal," she said, voice trembling with rage. "There is a restraining order. You're trespassing." The men ran. But they'd left behind a hammer, nails, and wooden planks. The message was clear. Kroll would keep coming. But so would they. The hearing was set for Monday morning. By Sunday night, Tanya couldn't eat. She paced the apartment, her nerves like live wires sparking under her skin. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, sketching quietly, pretending not to notice her agitation. Every time she passed the window, she looked down at the sidewalk where news vans had become a constant presence. What used to be just Fairview Court was now something more, something watched, recorded, talked about. Her life, their lives, had become the epicenter of a movement. But with that spotlight came pressure. Maya called late in the evening, her voice tight. "They're trying to get the judge changed." Kroll's lawyers submitted a challenge claiming bias. Tanya sat down hard on the couch. Bias? Based on what? They cited excessive media attention and claimed the judge has previously ruled in favor of tenants in unrelated cases. It's a stall tactic, but a dangerous one. If the judge recuses himself, we could lose momentum. Can we stop it? I'm fighting it. I filed an opposition brief, but we won't know until morning. Tanya ran her hand over her face. If they delay this hearing... I know, Maya said. They'll gut the building before we ever step into court. An hour later, the building's power went out. At first, Tanya thought it was a coincidence. Then she heard the hallway voices, panicked, frustrated. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped out. Neighbors stood in their doorways, children crying, elders clutching robes and jackets. They cut it? Someone asked. Breaker room's been tampered with, Carl from 4D announced. Padlock on it, new one. Tanya didn't hesitate. She called Maya. They're trying to force us out tonight. Maya's voice was flat with fury. I'm calling the emergency line at the city utilities office. Document everything. Tanya began filming. Flickering flashlights swept across the hallway as neighbors tried to comfort one another. Kira showed up moments later, dragging an industrial lantern from her storage closet. They're escalating, she muttered. No, Tanya said. They're cornered. She stood in the center of the hallway and raised her phone. To everyone watching, Fairview Court's power was just shut off. Tenants are sitting in the dark, in the cold, because a landlord wants us gone before morning. We have a court hearing at 9 a.m. This is not coincidence. This is war. The video hit 1,000 views within minutes. By dawn, it had 80,000. City workers arrived just before sunrise. The technician wearing a navy blue jacket tried to avoid eye contact as he removed the padlock from the breaker box and reset the power. "This didn't come from us," he muttered. "Somebody hired a private contractor to cut the line." Tanya recorded his statement. At 7:45 a.m., she stood outside in her best blouse and blazer, Kara beside her, both holding binders full of documentation. Maya pulled up in a silver sedan, stepped out with her briefcase, and nodded to them with a tight smile. "You ready?" "No," Tanya said, "but we're going anyway." The courthouse steps were lined with supporters holding signs. "Protect Fairview. Stop the lockouts. Justice for tenants." A reporter shouted questions as they passed, but Tanya kept her head down, clutching the folder tight to her chest. Inside the courtroom, Kroll sat at the defendant's table in an expensive gray suit, smirking. His lawyer, a thin man with slicked back hair, whispered something into his ear that made him chuckle. Maya leaned over. "Don't let him get in your head." The judge entered. Everyone stood. "Be seated," he said. He glanced down at his paperwork and adjusted his glasses. "We are here to determine the validity of an emergency injunction filed against Kroll Properties and whether sufficient cause exists to stay further eviction and demolition actions at Fairview Court Apartments pending full investigation." Tanya's heart pounded. The judge turned to Maya. "You may proceed." Maya rose. "Your Honor, we are submitting extensive documentation proving a coordinated, illegal campaign to displace tenants from a fully livable building under false pretenses. Our evidence includes city inspection reports showing no critical violations, emails from Kroll's offices confirming intent to demolish before proper permits were issued, and first-hand video accounts of tenants being locked out unlawfully." She passed a thick binder to the clerk. "Additionally," Maya continued, "we have sworn statements from tenants, audio recordings from contracted workers admitting to unauthorized actions, and a leaked internal memo from Kroll's legal counsel urging demolition, regardless of legal status." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A memo?" Maya nodded. "Included on page 17 of the binder." Kroll's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, that memo is stolen property. It should be inadmissible." The judge held up a hand. "I'll decide what's admissible. Sit down." The room fell quiet. Maya stepped back. Kroll's lawyer launched into a rehearsed monologue. "Your Honor, my client has acted in accordance with all state and local housing codes. The building in question has a long history of maintenance issues, structural decay, mold, faulty wiring. We submitted an independent engineering report outlining imminent risks to tenant safety." He held up a glossy folder. "Our priority is the safety of the residents," Tanya scoffed under her breath. The judge flipped through the report. "And yet, tenants were never offered alternative housing or relocation assistance?" "They were given proper notice," the lawyer said. 10 days?" The judge asked. "Legally sufficient." The judge stared at him for a long moment. "Sufficient and ethical are two different things, Counselor." He turned to Kroll. "Mr. Kroll, do you have anything to add?" Kroll stood slowly, buttoning his blazer. "Your Honor, I'm a businessman. I've invested in this city for over 2 decades. This building is a liability, and I'm simply acting within my rights to improve the neighborhood." Tanya couldn't stay silent. She stood. The courtroom turned. The judge looked surprised, but didn't stop her. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I have to speak." He gave a slow nod. "Proceed." She stepped forward. "I've lived at Fairview Court for 7 years. Raised my son there. Paid every rent check on time. I work full-time, take care of my neighbors, and until last month I thought this city gave a damn about people like us. But I was wrong. They want us invisible." She held up the eviction notice. "This?" This is a lie they're using to erase us. The judge leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Tanya turned to Kroll. You can build your condos, raise your rents, push out every family who built these blocks, but not without a fight. She sat down. Silence filled the room. The judge looked between the two parties. Then he spoke. I've seen enough. He removed his glasses. This court grants a full injunction on all eviction and demolition activity at Fairview Court Apartments, pending a full investigation into the legality of Kroll Properties' actions. Any attempt to alter or damage the building in the interim will result in immediate contempt charges. Tanya gasped. The judge continued. Furthermore, I'm ordering a review of all code enforcement actions tied to this case, as well as the zoning committee that approved the initial demolition application. Maya squeezed Tanya's arm. Kroll's lawyer jumped up. We object. Sit down, the judge snapped. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed. Tanya exhaled for the first time in hours. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers as news spread. The tenants had won, at least for now. Kroll exited quickly, avoiding cameras. Protesters surrounded him anyway, shouting, Shame. And you lose. Tanya stepped out to a wall of flashing lights, microphones, and hugs. Isaiah ran up to her and threw his arms around her waist. We're not leaving? He asked. She knelt down. No, baby. We're staying. Malik approached with a mic. What's next? She smiled for the first time in days. Now? Now we make it permanent. That night, the building felt alive again. Tenants who had packed now began to unpack. Laughter returned to the halls. Mr. Jenkins wheeled down from the elevator, shaking hands with neighbors. Kyra poured sparkling water into paper cups and raised hers. To Fairview. They clinked their drinks together. Maya, tired but glowing, added, to the people who made them listen. Tanya looked around the room at her son, her neighbors, her newfound allies, and for the first time in weeks, felt something close to hope. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. The injunction was temporary. The legal fight was only beginning. Kroll would be back with bigger lawyers and deeper pockets. But now, so would they. And this time they weren't alone. 3 days after the court victory, the neighborhood around Fairview Court pulsed with a strange mix of joy and vigilance. Tanya stepped outside that morning, into a street humming with activity. Children chalked, "We're still here," on the sidewalk in blue and yellow. Neighbors carried potted plants back into their apartments like returning life to the soil. But beneath the celebration, Tanya felt it, that low, rumbling anxiety that something wasn't finished. Because it wasn't. Maya had warned them plainly the night of the ruling. This injunction is a wall, not a fortress. It buys us time. But Kroll isn't the kind of man to walk away. And she was right. The very next morning, Kira had spotted a black SUV circling the block. Same tinted windows, same plates she'd seen before the first lockouts. They were watching again. Tanya joined Kira in the community room on the building's first floor, now unofficially transformed into Command Central. Maps were taped to the walls, tracking buildings Kroll had previously cleared. A calendar of upcoming legal dates hung next to a donation tracker for the tenant's legal defense fund. Kira was seated in front of her laptop, scanning documents. "We have another one," she said, not looking up. "Another building?" "Yeah, Lincoln Terrace. Same lawyer, same demolition plans, same fake inspection report." Tanya clenched her jaw. "Are they fighting back?" "Not yet. They didn't even know they were being targeted." That night, Tanya and Kira walked to Lincoln Terrace themselves. It was only 10 blocks away, another red brick working-class building, tucked between a laundromat and a barber shop. They knocked on doors, explained what had happened at Fairview, handed out flyers with Maya's contact info. Most people were suspicious at first, but when Tanya mentioned the lockouts, a tenant named Alondra stepped forward. "Wait, that happened to us just 2 weeks ago. The water was shut off for 3 days, and they claimed it was a pipe burst. But the plumber who came said nothing was wrong." Tanya gave her a hug. "You're not alone." By the end of the evening, They had 20 names and phone numbers and a new sense of purpose. It was no longer just about Fairview Court. This was bigger. This was a pattern, a method. And if they could expose it here, they could stop it everywhere. But just as momentum swelled again, the pushback arrived. On Thursday morning, 2 people claiming to be from building maintenance arrived with clipboards and hard hats. They knocked on apartment doors, asked to inspect gas lines, and took photos of people's living rooms. Kara caught them on video and demanded credentials. They fled before police arrived. Later that day, Tanya received an email with no subject line and no sender name, just one sentence. "You should be careful what you stir up." She read it 3 times, heart thudding. It wasn't the first threat she'd gotten, some anonymous messages, a few slurs on social media, but this one felt close. Like someone was watching the exact moment she'd let her guard down. She called Maya. "We need protection," Tanya said. "These people aren't just playing dirty, they're playing dangerous." Maya agreed. "Let's file a harassment complaint. In the meantime, document everything. And don't walk anywhere alone." That weekend, they held a town hall at the local community center. The crowd was larger than expected, over 200 people, standing room only. Some came from nearby neighborhoods, others from across the city. Many were residents of buildings now under scrutiny. Reverend Claiborne stood at the front, voice thundering as always. "This isn't just about real estate. This is about who gets to belong. This is about power." Then she gestured to Tanya. "This is the woman who said no." And because she said no, they all stood up. The applause was thunderous. Tanya took the mic, her hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to say. "They tried to disappear us," she said. "But we showed them we're not going anywhere. And now? Now we make sure no one else gets erased." She laid out their demands. Full investigation into Kroll properties, permanent protection for tenants at Fairview and Lincoln Terrace, a citywide moratorium on demolition permits without public review, and funding for tenant-run housing cooperatives. The energy in the room was electric. People stood and pledged donations. Lawyers offered services. Local businesses agreed to post signs in their windows. "Kroll not welcome here." It was a tide turning, but tides attract predators. That same night, Tanya's car was vandalized. She found it the next morning with the windows smashed in, her dashboard ripped open, and the word I spray painted across the side in red. She stood in silence for a full minute before she could move. Isaiah appeared behind her in his pajamas. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around her waist. Kira arrived 5 minutes later, hands balled into fists. "We should call the press." "No," Tanya said. "We fix it. Then we march again." And they did. On Monday, 1,000 people filled City Hall Plaza. It was the largest protest yet. Malik covered it in real time, streaming the event across platforms. Maya spoke. Reverend Claiborne prayed. Tanya stood at the top of the courthouse steps and listed every building Kroll had touched, every tenant displaced, every fake permit signed. And then she said the words that made headlines the next day. "If our city won't stop this cancer, then we will." That week, City Council scheduled an emergency meeting. Tanya, Maya, and 3 other tenant leaders were invited to speak. The pressure worked. Council proposed a temporary freeze on demolition permits tied to Kroll properties. The mayor, who had stayed silent through most of the crisis, released a statement. "We will not tolerate the displacement of our residents under false pretenses." But Kroll wasn't finished. On Wednesday, Maya received a letter. It was a settlement offer. Kroll was offering Tanya $50,000 to drop the case, vacate her apartment, and agree to a non-disclosure agreement. Maya texted Tanya a photo of the document with a single line. "You need to see this in person." Tanya read it in stunned silence. Then she laughed. "He thinks this is about money," she said. "He still doesn't get it. They called a press conference." Tanya held the letter up for cameras. "This is what they think we're worth. 50 grand to keep our mouths shut, to erase a whole community." to bulldoze our memories and build condos over the bones. I'm not taking their money. I'm taking them to court. The story spread again, this time with fire. Outrage poured in from across the country. Politicians weighed in. Housing activists from other cities reached out, eager to replicate the model Fairview had created. And for the first time, Kroll's name appeared in national headlines, not as a businessman, but as a symbol of modern-day urban displacement. That weekend, the community organized a homecoming day at Fairview Court. Food trucks parked out front. Local bands played. Children painted murals on canvas stretched across the courtyard. Tanya stood back and watched as families who had once packed to leave now danced and laughed in the sun. Mr. Jenkins sat in a lone chair, sunglasses on, nodding along to the music. Kira walked over holding plates of food. "We might actually be winning," she said. Tanya smiled. "Feels like it." But even as they celebrated, Tanya knew the real trial was still coming. They had a court date in 3 weeks. The full hearing. Maya was prepping night and day. Tanya and Kira gathered more testimonies, more data, more proof. Malik prepared a documentary segment for public broadcast. A tenant-led housing bill was drafted, soon to be introduced to city council. They were no longer reacting. They were building. That night, Tanya stood at her window, Isaiah asleep in his room. She looked out at the street, now calm. No circling cars. No flashing lights, just quiet. But it wasn't silence born of defeat. It was the calm before another wave. And this time she was ready for it. The courthouse smelled like cold air and overwaxed floors. Tanya sat on the hard bench just outside courtroom 4B, her hands wrapped tightly around a styrofoam cup of black coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. The hallway buzzed with the low static of voices, shuffled papers, and the tap of impatient heels. Today wasn't just about injunctions or temporary stays, this was it. The trial. The hearing that would decide whether Fairview Court lived or died. Across from her, Isaiah sat with a comic book in his lap, pretending to read. His leg bounced restlessly beneath him. Kira paced nearby, clutching her notes. Malik leaned against the far wall, camera off for now, but his expression alert, cataloging every shift in energy. Maya stood beside Tanya, dressed in navy slacks and a black blazer, her expression calm but unreadable, like a chess player deep in endgame strategy. The door to the courtroom opened, and a bailiff stepped out. "Fairview v. Kroll," he called. They stood in unison. Tanya exhaled once and stepped through the doorway into the crucible. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Journalists scribbled notes. City officials sat stone-faced in the back row. A few familiar faces from the protests gave small nods of encouragement. The judge, an older black woman with stern eyes and a meticulous gray bun, called the room to order. "We are here to consider the legality of eviction procedures and redevelopment practices carried out by Kroll Properties in the case of Fairview Court Apartments. The court reminds both parties that perjury will not be tolerated." Kroll sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 attorneys and wearing his usual smug indifference. Tanya didn't look at him. She didn't have to. She could feel him smirking. Maya stood. "Your Honor, our case is simple. The tenants of Fairview Court were subjected to a targeted, illegal campaign of intimidation, fraudulent code violations, and unlawful evictions. The intent was never to improve safety or make repairs. It was to clear a building of black and working-class residents in order to make way for luxury development." She gestured toward the evidence cart beside her, stacked with binders, photos, flash drives. "We have internal emails, financial documents, witness statements, city inspection reports, and recorded audio of hired contractors and guards admitting to illegal activity. We are not alleging confusion or mismanagement. We are alleging conspiracy and fraud." The judge turned to Kroll's lawyer, a man named Lutz, who stood slowly adjusting his cuffs. "Your Honor, my client is a property owner, exercising his lawful rights to manage a deteriorating building. Any decision to vacate tenants was made in accordance with legal standards and supported By multiple independent evaluations of the property's condition? Maya raised a hand. We'll be presenting evidence showing those evaluations were purchased. Lutz's lip curled. We'll see. Witnesses were called. Sandra from 1A testified. First. Her voice shook, but her hands didn't. They told me there was mold, but I'd lived there 12 years and never saw a single spot. Then the water was shut off without notice. They said it was a burst pipe. It wasn't. I asked to see the report. They said it was private. Mr. Jenkins followed, wheeled in by a volunteer. His oxygen tube trembled as he spoke, but his voice carried. I'm 82 years old, fought in 2 wars. This building is my home. I watched them lock my neighbors out, one by one. They cut our power in the middle of winter. I called 311. They hung up on me. Carl from 4D, then Kira, then Alondra from Lincoln Terrace. One by one, the stories added up like a pattern etched into stone, each thread too similar to be coincidence. Maya presented photos of unchanged conditions and units marked as hazards, copies of paid invoices to a third-party contractor who'd flagged the building's structure as unsound, then was seen at a rooftop bar days later bragging about the bonus he got. Then she played the voicemail. Tanya recognized it immediately. The distorted voice of a man anonymous saying, "You should be careful what you stir up." We traced this to a burner phone registered 2 days after the first injunction. Maya said, "Purchased at a gas station 2 blocks from Kroll's office." Lutz objected. "Speculative, irrelevant." The judge raised a hand. "It speaks to intent. I'll allow it." Tanya felt her palms begin to sweat. Her turn was coming. And then it did. She rose and walked to the stand. The courtroom watched. Her heart thudded like it wanted to climb out of her chest. But her voice was clear. "I'm Tanya Whitaker. I've lived at Fairview Court for 7 years. My son was born there. My mother died in the apartment above mine. I've paid rent every month on time. I've followed the rules. I've taken care of my neighbors. But none of that mattered when Mr. Kroll decided we were worth more gone than present." She looked across the room at the judge. "They didn't knock, they didn't call, they changed our locks, cut our lights, hired security to intimidate us. My son, he's 12, asked if we'd be living in our car." She paused, blinking back the burn in her eyes. "And for what? So they could build condos, raise rent, flip a building and pretend we were never there?" She turned to the defense table. Kroll stared at her with a glassy expression, unmoved. She stared right back. "I am not invisible. None of us are." When she stepped down, there was no applause, but there didn't need to be. The silence in the courtroom was its own thunder. Then Maya brought out the final piece, the contract. A redevelopment agreement signed months before any eviction notices had gone out, between Kroll and a high-end real estate firm, detailing plans to demolish Fairview Court and break ground on luxury apartments. Target demographic: young professionals, dual-income households. The start date was listed as June 1st. The eviction notices were dated April 10th. "Your Honor," Maya said, "this was never about safety. It was always about profit." Kroll's lawyer didn't speak for several moments. Then, finally, he stood, hands shaking slightly, and muttered, "We rest, Your Honor." The judge sat quietly for a long time, tapping a pen against the bench. Then she spoke. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony carefully. What I see is not a dispute between tenant and landlord. What I see is a systemic campaign to dispossess, displace, and erase a community under the guise of legality." She paused. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiffs." Maya's eyes widened. "All eviction actions tied to Fairview Court are hereby declared unlawful. The court orders full restitution of tenant rights, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal review." A gasp ran through the room. Kroll's face finally changed. He blinked, recoiled slightly, leaned toward his lawyer in a panic. The judge wasn't done. "I am also recommending a formal audit of all properties owned by Kroll Holdings and their affiliations with city code enforcement agencies." Tanya sat frozen. The judge looked directly at her. "Miss Whitaker, your courage is noted in this court's record, and your son should be very proud." Tanya covered her mouth with both hands. The gavel came down. Court was adjourned. Outside it was chaos. The steps of the courthouse were a frenzy of cameras, microphones, and shouted questions. Maya gave a statement. So did Reverend Claiborne. Tanya tried to slip away quietly, but Malik stopped her. "You've just made history," he said. "Don't you want to say something?" She turned slowly to the crowd. She didn't raise her voice, but everyone went silent. "We never asked for a spotlight. We just asked to be treated like people. They tried to evict us, but we're still here, and we'll be here tomorrow. And the day after that?" And then she stepped down, took Isaiah's hand, and walked away, not into obscurity, but into something far more powerful. A future they were writing themselves. 6 months later, Fairview Court stood taller than it ever had, unchanged in brick and mortar, but reborn in spirit. The cracked bricks along the eastern stairwell had been repaired, but left partially exposed as a tribute. A golden plaque had been affixed to the entrance wall near the lobby. Fairview Court, fought for, saved by, and belonging to its people. Beneath it, 3 names: Tanya Whitaker, David Jenkins, Kira Neal. That morning, the sun poured in across the block in wide golden strokes. Tanya stood on the sidewalk, wearing a white blouse and dark jeans, her hands tucked into the pockets of her light jacket, as she watched people gather. Not reporters this time, not protesters, just neighbors, friends, children with balloons, teachers, grandparents, a brass band warming up down the block. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was set for noon. Isaiah ran out of the building holding 2 paper programs and a juice box, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Setting up chairs inside, too," he said. "Mrs. Washington's got the mic first." Tanya nodded, smiling at her son's excitement. "You practicing your speech?" He rolled his eyes. "I don't have a speech. You've got a line," she said. Okay, he replied, groaning a little but secretly proud. "I'll say it." Inside the building, the walls had been painted warm, earthy tones. A massive mural now filled the hallway, hands linked in protest, families standing tall, a police officer holding eviction papers shattered into fragments under a tenant's foot. At the center of the mural stood Tanya, one hand holding Isaiah's, the other raised high, palm open. Kira was behind her, and beside her was Mr. Jenkins, strong and steady, leaning on his cane. Tanya still remembered the morning the artist had unveiled it. She'd been too stunned to speak. Isaiah had simply whispered, "That's you." In the time since the trial, Kroll Holdings had been investigated, fined, and publicly condemned. 2 city officials resigned. Several redevelopment contracts were frozen. Kroll himself faced civil charges in 3 different districts, and although he hadn't spent a single night in jail yet, his real estate empire had fractured. But Tanya never chased vengeance. That was never her goal. Instead, she helped build something new. With the support of the tenants' union and pro bono assistance from Maya, Fairview Court became one of the city's first resident-owned housing cooperatives. Each tenant now had a share. Every decision, from maintenance to rental policies, was made by the elected tenant board. Tanya served as its chairwoman. Kira had launched a housing justice workshop through the local community college. Mr. Jenkins, once a quiet presence, had become a symbol speaking at youth programs, interviewed for a documentary now in post-production. Isaiah had written an essay titled "The House That Tried to Leave Us," and won first place in the city's youth storytelling contest. As people gathered for the ceremony, Tanya moved through the crowd, shaking hands, hugging elders, posing for selfies. It still felt strange to be recognized in grocery stores, thanked in parks, but the thing she cherished most was the feeling of still being home. The microphone crackled. Kira stepped forward to open the event. She wore a fitted red dress and a beaming smile. "Welcome, everyone," she said, "to the official relaunch of Fairview Court, not just as a building, but as a living memory, a legacy of resistance." Cheers erupted. She continued, 6 months ago, We stood on these steps as a community that had been ignored, neglected, and nearly erased. Today, we stand here not as survivors, but as owners, as protectors of something bigger than walls. We are proof that when people fight together, they win. Next came Reverend Claiborne, her silver braids pulled back in a regal twist. She read a poem by Langston Hughes and prayed over the space, her voice soft and mighty all at once. Let no door close without consent. Let no roof cover injustice. Let these bricks carry names. Then Mrs. Washington took the mic, her voice wobbly but full of fire. I lived through 4 landlords, 3 rent hikes, and 2 floods in this place. But I never packed a box. I stayed. We stayed because we knew what they didn't. This ain't just where we live. It's who we are. The crowd stood, applauding. Tanya stepped forward. She hadn't prepared anything written. She didn't need to. She looked at the mural behind her, at Isaiah's proud eyes, at Kira's steady nod. I've said a lot of things these past months, Tanya began. In courtrooms, in protests, in interviews. But what I haven't said enough is thank you. She looked out at the faces gathered, some tired, some still healing, all hopeful. Thank you to every neighbor who stayed when it was easier to leave. Thank you to every voice that echoed ours. Thank you to every person who didn't look away. She paused. They tried to buy our silence. They tried to weaponize fear. But we proved something important. When you stand together, even against Goliath, you don't have to run. You build. The clapping rose again. She smiled. Now I want to hand the mic to someone who reminded me every day that this fight wasn't just about now. It was about the future. She turned to Isaiah and gestured for him to come forward. He shuffled up nervously, then cleared his throat. The microphone screeched slightly, and he winced. Then he grinned and said, "Fairview is our home. It always was. It always will be." The crowd roared. Tanya wiped her eyes. After the ribbon was cut, after the music began and plates of catered jollof rice, fried chicken, and baked macaroni were passed around, Tanya slipped away for a moment and walked down the hallway toward her apartment. She stopped in front of Mr. Jenkins' door. It was open. "Come in," he called. She stepped inside. He sat in his recliner, sunlight pouring over him through a cracked window. "Watching from here?" she asked. "Too many cameras outside," he said with a chuckle. "I already had my 15 minutes. She laughed and sat beside him. "Hard to believe we made it," she said. "No," he replied. "You made it believable." They sat in silence a moment. Then Mr. Jenkins asked, "Do you remember the day you found my cane by the door?" Tanya nodded slowly. "I wasn't going to come back," he admitted. "I was tired. I'd lost before. I thought this would end the same. What changed your mind?" "You, standing there, still fighting, made me realize the war wasn't over. It was just waiting for someone to finish it." Tanya didn't know what to say, so she held his hand. Later that night, as the party dwindled and dusk rolled in, Tanya stood at her window, watching the street lights flicker on. The mural glowed in the fading sun. Isaiah was already asleep, his speech program folded on the table. She stepped out onto her small balcony and looked up. Above her, across the other balconies, neighbors waved and laughed. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come." It had. They'd done it. They'd fought back. And won. Because they refused to be invisible. Because they knew that home was not just a place, it was a promise. And for once, that promise had been kept. Forever etched into brick, into breath, into memory,